Hello and welcome again. My name is Seth Joyner, Senior Program Manager at the National Committee on North Korea, and I'm happy to introduce today's program, a discussion on the book Beyond Armistice, Efforts for Peace on the Korean Peninsula. For those of you new to our organization, NCNK is an NGO working to promote peace and security on the Korean Peninsula and improve the lives of the North Korean people. NCNK is a non-governmental, nonpartisan organization whose membership reflects a broad range of perspectives and subject matter expertise related to North Korea. NCNK serves to share information among its members, advance their work, and provide the broader public with substantive and balanced information about North Korea. We are joined today by two special guests, Allison Lee of the Center for Peace and Conflict Studies and Glyn Ford of Track 2 Asia. This webinar will also be moderated by NCNK's very own Executive Director, Keith Luse. I'd like to turn it over now to him to further introduce our guest speakers and then to jump into leading what is sure to be an insightful discussion on the book Beyond Armistice. Over to you, Keith.
Thank you, Seth, and welcome to our audience from wherever you may be. We are really pleased today to have you and also to have Glyn Ford and Allison Lee with us. You have received their bios as part of the announcement invitation, so please review the bios if you have not already. The focus of this meeting today, as you know, is a review, a discussion about Beyond the Armistice, a production of CPCS. 1953, the armistice was signed. And as we are all aware, peace is still elusive on the Korean Peninsula. At this time, I want to turn first to Allison and then to Glyn for any opening remarks they have about the book. Allison, tell us about the book, the purpose, how this came about.
Thank you, Keith, and thank you, NCNK, for hosting this platform. So the Center for Peace and Conflict Studies, we're based in Cambodia. We published these books essentially with the purpose to generate more dialogue. It is not just a book of a lot of stories, insights, or ideas, but it's also a tool. We use this as also a platform for different stakeholders and partners to engage in some constructive dialogue. So I'm really thankful for this opportunity today to be able to connect to a lot of you online here. So the book, Beyond the Armistice, Efforts for Peace on the Korean Peninsula. I mean, speaking as someone who helped putting this book together, it's been a great pleasurable journey. This role as a book coordinator has allowed me to listen to a lot of insights and also personal stories of many remarkable individuals featured in the book. And I should say that each conversation that I had really opened my eye to see the different approaches of these individuals in navigating the complex landscape on the Korean Peninsula. So these stories, I would say, reveal not just the struggles of these people, but also their creativity, their resilience, and also their strength in challenging the existing narrative, and also how they nurture constructive relationship toward peace. So this is what the book is in general about.
All right, thank you. Glyn, any opening remarks about this project, about the book, your contribution?
Well, I mean, I welcome the publication of the book. It's bringing together a set of experiences that haven't been brought together in the past, and we have to thank the CPCS for doing that. There's a sharp distinction in terms of dealing with North Korea between those that engage in negotiation, and that's taken place at various times in the past, and those of us who have a rather different role, which is dialogue. And I've been engaged with the North Koreans in various ways now for a quarter of a century in terms of a dialogue between principally the United Kingdom or Europe and Pyongyang. Now, I've been lucky, it was luck rather than anything else, that my engagement has been with the party. most people engage with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs or one of their adjuncts, partly because I was a politician when this started. My engagement's been with the party. And as you will know, but not necessarily all your audience, I was asked to establish a political dialogue with the International Department of the Party back in 2011. And that's been ongoing. It's kind of paused at the moment because the West is still not back, although North Korea is beginning to open up to the West again in a variety of ways. We have a postponed invitation to travel back to Pyongyang to restart that dialogue. And I think it's going to be important. A lot of things have changed in the last 12 months. We've had the Kim Jong-un's New Year's address, in which, if you want, the prospects of reunification were disappeared and engagement with Seoul. More recently, we've had, of course, Yoon's martial law attempt and the consequences of that. And we've had the election of the re-election of President Trump after a 4-year gap in the United States. So yeah, we're in a very fluid political environment for the moment. We have to see where things go. But certainly I see a role for people like Allison and myself who are engaging in track 2. Well, actually track 1.5, because there aren't NGOs in any meaningful sense of the term in Pyongyang, but that track 1.5 work can actually create the environment where we can actually see progress on direct negotiations. It seems to me there is no peace on the Korean Peninsula in a long-term meaningful sense of the term without some engagement with Washington.
Thank you. Allison, you're to be commended for making the book available online. And Seth, if possible, you might provide a link to the book for our viewers today. And by the way, for those in the audience, if you have questions or comments, please submit those through the Q&A function. Glyn, you, in your comments in the past, in your contribution, you're always referring to the importance of dialogue, the importance of talking. But as you're aware, in terms of the United States and the DPRK, following the Hanoi summit, North Korea has not been willing to engage in dialogue with the U.S. The Biden administration extended a willingness to engage. Can you break this down for us? In other words, how can we have dialogue if North Korea is not willing to engage in such? Or what's additional context here that I'm leaving out?
Well, I mean, since the collapse of the Soviet Empire in the late 80s, very early 90s, the North Koreans adopted a twofold approach. They wanted an independent security, which was what drove them down, in a sense, down the nuclear path. Both Kim Il-sung, Kim Jong-il, Kim Jong-un followed that. And they also followed a commitment to try and engage with the United States as the world dominating power. They've always had concern about finding an American president who was willing, or an American administration that was willing to engage in a serious way. And there have been various engagements. Jimmy Carter was rather important in setting the situation for the agreed framework. And then you had the Trump engagement. Trump offered them hope in Singapore of being able to come to some kind of deal. The problem was with Hanoi, because the message that Kim Jong-un took from Hanoi was not that Trump was unwilling to engage, but Trump was unable to engage. Their view, for what it was worth, he was subverted by the people around him. And so that long-term process actually paused, and Kim went into a rethink. That, coupled with events in Afghanistan, the Ukraine war, Gaza, and even more recently Syria, means that the North Koreans now see that there is an alternative. There is a new Cold War emerging. So you don't have to engage with the United States anymore. You've got another option, which is Beijing, Moscow, and maybe Tehran. And so they're in that situation. I think under Trump, I would put money on Kim Jong-un being willing to meet with Trump if Trump wants to do that. I would also put money on them being unwilling to denuclearize in any meaningful time scale. But what you could do is that can be important. You could get a freeze on nuclear weapons testing and ICBM testing, because one of the things that everyone is nervous about at the moment is the North Koreans and the Russians working together. North Korea's big problem is that its ICBM is capable of hitting the mainland United States, actually don't necessarily have the payload, the guidance, or most importantly, re-entry capability. And the trouble is there's no way they can actually test that without Russian help. And a Russian ship in the deep South Pacific would actually be able to tell them how much they're advancing, certainly with respect to re-entry capabilities and the rest. So that would certainly be a problem for Washington if the North was actually able to demonstrate to its own satisfaction that it had the capability of hitting mainland United States in a meaningful way.
Thank you, Glyn. So when we speak of dialogue, one of the dialogue approaches with North Korea is what's referred to as Track 2 talks. Track 1 talks generally are considered to be government to government. Track 2 talks are talks between non-governmental officials, say from the US, Europe, wherever, and North Korean officials. So it's not technically Track 2, perhaps.
Well, I call 1.5.
Right. Track 1.5. Either way, Allison, as you know, CPCS has been an important venue for Track 2 talks with North Korea. In fact, I appreciate years ago when Dr. Emma Leslie contacted NCNK and made us aware of your work. And I have been impressed through the years at CPCS' ability to engage with the North Koreans. They obviously I think they view CPCS as they did Don Zagoria in New York and the National Committee on American Foreign Policy. For years, the North Koreans would view Zagoria and NCAFP as a trusted place for dialogue. And I believe they view CPCS the same way. Can you elaborate on the ability you've had to be for the North Koreans to be receptive to CPCS hosting them and hosting others?
Wow, this is a big question because it comes down to a lot of components of how we build trust and build solid relationship with our partners. So CPCS is a peace organization committed to facilitating effective strategy on conflict transformation in Asia. Our core approaches centered on facilitation, learning, and also facilitation and learning. So we have been partnering with the Korean National Peace Committee since about 10 years ago. So the platform that we offer at the Center for Peace and Conflict Study is essentially a multilateral platform where they would feel rather safe about learning from different other peace contexts and experiences from other peace advocates and practitioners in the region. So they will not be at the focus of like when we want to talk about Korean issue, it always sounds like they're always the bad child, the bad guy in the room. But when we put it in a multilateral platform, it's about cross-learning. It's about listening to different other stakeholders and practitioners' perspective. It's also about learning from other peace and conflict context. So this would create a more equitable environment for not just the North Koreans, but also other Asian actors as well, for them to listen to the North Korean perspective, and also for the DPRK people to listen to the Asian practitioners. So it also creates a sense of community. So it's not only about finding out the solution or figuring out what works and what doesn't work, but also, building a sense of community through building understanding and trust.
So, Allison, one of the contributors to the book is a North Korean, Mr. O. Can you tell us about Mr. O?
Yeah, so I want to clarify a bit in that piece in the book is not a direct contribution from the Korean National Peace Committee, but it's actually extracted from an interview that CPCS did back in 2019 when Dr. Emma Leslie visited Pyongyang. So at that time, we had the privilege to talk to a few Korean National Peace Committee members, and one of them is the gentleman, Mr. Oh, that we finally extracted his sharing in our book. So that sharing is about how North Korean feels about their experiences during the war, and the point is to highlight the fact that North Koreans are also normal human beings like us. They want to have the best for the young generation, for the children, and they also have their own determination and will for peace for the future generation. So yeah, thanks for mentioning this, because including the DPRK people in our dialogue platform is very essential to our strategy, because as a peace organization committed to conflict transformation, we strongly believe that we cannot achieve peace in Asia if we continue to contribute to the isolationist approach where the North Koreans continue to be marginalized. So no matter how difficult it is, no matter how big the ideological division it is, we are committed to still including the DPRK people, as well as other actors as well, in our dialogue platform. So we invited them to join our Peace Practitioners Research Conference since, I think, 2017. And even during COVID, where they cannot travel to Cambodia for conferences, they are still committed to sending their written remarks to our conference. So through this kind of ongoing communication, and also, through this kind of communication, despite a very difficult time, trust is built along the way, I would say.
Thank you. So when we speak of dialogue involving North Korea, often what comes to mind are negotiators sitting around a table, which is, again, track 1, track 2. But significant dialogue has occurred through the years, for example, in the American context with North Korea, with North Koreans at the local level. By virtue of American NGOs and individuals who have been in North Korea in terms of medical assistance, humanitarian aid. I think of Linda Lewis with the American Friends Service Committee, who's spent years in North Korea, back and forth. Dr. Key Park, Heidi Linton. There are several Americans, Americans who in the past actually hosted North Korean delegations in the United States for agriculture purposes, for medical. Many Americans are unaware that North Korean delegations were in Oregon, were in Mississippi, and other parts of the U.S. receiving training and interacting with Americans. The Carter Center as well in Georgia. And so dialogue in the general context actually covers many areas. And while the headlines point to, understandably, peace negotiations, what's happening at the local level, the people-to-people democracy, people-to-people, excuse me, discussions, this aspect of dialogue is so important because the North Korean people directly have an opportunity to interact with Americans, to interact with Europeans, with others along the way. But now back to the issue of negotiations. We have many Americans who have been involved in formal negotiations with North Korea, such as Ambassador Joe DeTrani, who now has been involved with the North Koreans in the Track 2 context. There are other Americans like Suzanne DiMaggio, Jenny Town, etc., who have been involved in the Track 2 context. Now, Glyn, you represent an individual who used to be an official on behalf of the EU dealing with the North Koreans, and now in your private capacity. So I want to ask you, Glyn, do they view you differently now because you're private sector versus government? Do they respect you more? Do they trust you less or more? Tell us about your own road on the dialogue.
I mean, I can't answer some of those
Can
questions.
you speak up, please?
I can't answer some of those questions in terms of do they trust me more or less. They're certainly still very happy to engage with me. I mean, I saw the North Korean embassy people in London 2 days ago, and I'll probably be seeing them again in a few weeks' time. So in that sense, and they are very happy after I cease being an official, they're very happy for me to organize delegations to visit and meet with them. So in that sense, I think there is still a job for me to do. They do, I think, believe, and probably accurately, that I have the ear of people who matter both in Brussels in terms of engagement with North Korea and in the United Kingdom. And I meet with people from the North Korean embassy in Berlin, obviously London, as I've said, and I have met with Stockholm and Vienna. So I have a circle there. I think the most important thing is to act as, in a sense, as a bridge. It's a two-way process. Far too often, it seems to me that we don't spend time trying to find out what they want, what they are interested in. And in a sense, they're not interested in denuclearization. They're prepared to talk about denuclearization in exchange for something else. And we often don't spend enough time looking at what the something else is, rather than focusing, understandably, on our own concerns. But the North Koreans have absolutely no interest in denuclearization unless it's part of an ongoing process that actually gives them something that they actually want and need.
All right. So, Allison, I'd like to refer to a question submitted by Dr. Linda Yar. Which countries in Asia are represented in CPCS dialogues and conferences?
Yeah, so we have mostly civil society representatives from the Republic of Korea, that is South Korea. We have representatives from Japan, sometimes from China, and Glyn and Keith is also represented in our dialogue. So we have from the US and the UK, and what did I miss? And also our CPCS team is also a team of a team of practitioners from different cultural backgrounds as well. We have Cambodian practitioners who are seasoned in the Cambodian peace process. And yeah, so what did I miss? Yeah, so these are the core people attending our dialogue.
And if I recall, some of your areas of focus have included Myanmar, the Philippines in the past, correct? And I know that one of the strengths of CPCS is, as you work with countries in the region or parties in the region, you bring in others from the region to be mentor types or examples of what can happen in terms of moving from conflict to more of a peaceful approach. Now, Allison Hall-Healy asks, what are some small steps that could be taken to reduce the marginalization of North Korea that you refer to?
This is a very good question. I think one small step that every one of us can do is really to check our assumption when we process how we see each other. So, I mean, it's not only about the North Korean people, but also with your so-called enemy people. So what makes you think that they are your enemy? They are them, they are not part of yourself. So I think one small step would be to really to check your assumption, and also to try to involve into opportunities where you can have direct engagement, direct interaction with them.
All right. So Glenn, as you are aware, South Korean officials refused to sign the armistice. They were unhappy with the situation at the time and the part of the UN and the US with proceeding with the Chinese, etc. Well, now, decades later, we're in a situation where a new US president's coming in. There are questions by some in terms of his commitment to the US ROK alliance. We have a situation of political divisiveness in the ROK. North Korea, through a range of actions in recent months, Kim Jong-un has signaled his unwillingness to engage with the ROK, his interest, his commitment to really decouple or disassemble any points of contact or major points of contact between the two countries. My question is this, this is the peninsula, peace on the peninsula is a complex situation. North Korea, South Korea, China. China will insist on having a say in any eventual peace process or peaceful resolution. And then enter a new administration, which President Trump in the past has a record of reaching out to Kim Jong-un. President Trump agreed to the Singapore summit, helped set up the Singapore summit. Kim Jong-un agreed. There were some key points of agreement. There was some success. Following that summit, North Korea did, in fact, return remains of U.S. service people, et cetera, et cetera. And it was Kim Jong-un's hope, and perhaps that of President Trump, to continue that, which, as we know, failed at Hanoi. But my point is, do you see a situation where decades later, an effort to bring peace on the peninsula, an effort for a peaceful resolution between the United States and North Korea, is it possible, do you envision this administration possibly going down a path of a bilateral agreement of some sort, with or without South Korea agreement?
I'm not sure bilateral, but as you pointed out, in terms of the armistice was essentially a deal between Pyongyang, Beijing, and Washington, because Seoul did not sign the armistice. I can imagine a similar outcome this time around, that you could actually have a process that there was a deal which was put to Seoul at the end as take it or leave it. It's very difficult to imagine that if Donald Trump does a deal, that Seoul could stand out against it. I think a deal is going to be very difficult to do, and we could get into that. I mean, it's going to need other actors apart from Washington and Beijing and Pyongyang, in a sense, because the North Korea is looking for security guarantees, like with the JPCOA, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action with Iran. The North Koreans, I could go into the detail, I won't, are actually rather attracted by the Iran deal, because the agreed framework was torn up by Bush the Younger without any controls, whereas the JPCOA, when Trump walked away from it in his last term as president, actually everybody else, and I'm talking about the United Kingdom, the European Union, the Germans, along with the Russians and the Chinese, said, hang on, this is working. So I think they're looking for that kind of relationship. But I can absolutely imagine that South Korea is completely sidelined in this process if Trump thinks he can get a deal. I mean, the South Koreans were pushed to the margins, in my view, both of Singapore and Hanoi, and that could very easily continue. What we've got to worry about, in a sense, is that President Trump is looking at safeguarding the United States and is less interested in safeguarding Seoul or Tokyo, which is one of the reasons around the ICBM testing and the rest. Extended deterrence may not continue in its current levels of intensity if there is a deal that makes the US safe from Pyongyang, but still leaves Seoul and Tokyo in some danger.
So, Glenn, we have a question for you from Frank Alm with the U.S. Institute of Peace. If North Korea is willing to engage, impose a freeze, and even dismantle Yongbyon, what U.S. gives, quote, gives, do you think will be sufficient for North Korea to accept? Something less than relief from all civilian sector, UN sanctions post-2016, question mark. In other words, how can the two sides overcome the stalemate from Hanoi?
Okay. I'm not sure. Frank is going a little bit further than I went. I said you could talk about a freeze on nuclear testing and maybe ICBM testing. He then talks about dismantling Yongbyon. I'm not sure that that's necessarily going to be on the same agenda. So that's one of the difficulties that we would actually face, is to get that agreement. What do they want? Well, I mean, they're not interested. People talk about lifting US sanctions. I mean, the North Koreans are very well aware that's never going to happen. I mean, what they're interested in is US allowing the lifting of UN sanctions. And that's certainly something early on. And secondly, they're interested, President Trump is not going to pay, but it may well be that they're also very interested, like with the agreed framework, in some kind of industrial fund where there's humanitarian aid, there's industrial aid, there's work on energy. I mean, one of the differences between Singapore and Biden, Singapore actually, from a North Korean perspective, allowed them to continue with a civil nuclear program. Biden was talking about denuclearizing North Korea rather than denuclearizing the peninsula. And what that was understood to mean in Pyongyang is that no civil nuclear program. And of course, as we're aware, the big problem for North Korea is energy. And they saw, if you want, the nuclear route as solving their energy problems. They're not going to be solved by new coal, by hydropower, coal mines, or for that matter, anything much else.
Allison, any comments?
No.
All right. Dr. Charles Sands says this past fall, about 15 foreign faculty, no Americans, were able to teach at the Pyongyang University of Science and Technology in Pyongyang. Allison, is CPCS involved in any educational projects in North Korea?
The quick answer is no, but allow me to stretch a bit from this question because it reminds me of some earlier exchange that the CPCS has done in Pyongyang. So I think in 2017, 18, 19, when CPCS was invited to lead a delegation to visit Pyongyang to meet with the KMPC, we also invited some other peace practitioners, advocates, civil society leaders where their focus may not be on Korean Peninsula or Korean related issues, but we also invited them to join us as a delegate to visit Pyongyang. So I mean the importance of this kind of exchange is that when we have this trust in our partnership with a North Korean partner, we use that trust as a bridge to also bring in other expertise, insights that is available in our regional network. For example, our network in the Philippines, in Myanmar, that Keith, you have also mentioned. So this is the role of CPCS has been playing in our interaction with the DPRK. So yeah, whether in Pyongyang or in Cambodia, in Siem Reap, we do the similar things of sustaining the bridges and then helping channeling different insights, expertise, perspective, essentially, to each other.
So, Allison, along a similar line, we have a question from Biesel Soren. If the North Koreans agree to engage in peace building with the peace community in general and with CPCS, how do you create trust, security, and a safe environment for them?
Well, I think the first very important commitment, a very important component is commitment. It really takes long time and serious effort to build that trust, and is not about a one-off event, and then they will trust you in doing that. It's also not about how big your organization is. It's about how you, and sometimes it's also about how you pay attention into details in your facilitation. So to be mindful of of how they see their history, how they see how they see the Korean War, for example, because their way of interpreting their conflict and also history is very much different from what a lot of people sees. So paying attention to details, paying attention and be mindful of how they see their history, their conflict is something that can build a good foundation of building that trust, I would say.
All right. So, Allison, as you're aware, Jeffrey Feltman, the former Undersecretary General for Political Affairs with the UN, is a contributor to the book. Talk to us, if you would, please, about what role the UN directly or indirectly has had in the work of CPCS as relates to North Korea or otherwise.
Yeah, we have involved some UNDPPA representative in our past Korean Roundtable event back in, I think, 2017, 2018. Yeah, it was a very great and impactful dialogue at that time, I would say. And then going into 2019, 2020, we're not able to have a lot of in-person dialogue, that kind, but we're still having a very close connection with them to keep updating on how we are going to convene conversation involving North Korean people.
Glyn, from where you sit, what role is there, if any, for the UN at the present time in an active way to contribute to a peaceful resolution on the Korean Peninsula?
Well, firstly, let me say that Jeff Feldman visited Pyongyang in the run-up to all the events around 2017. And my understanding, he was quite important at beginning to open up that space for dialogue that followed with Kim Jong-un's New Year's address when he offered to go to the Pyeongchang Olympics. So the UN have played a role. I mean, the UN is, as I understand it, is engaged with the North Koreans at the moment. And there was a North Korean delegation that came to Vienna to talk about human rights issues with the UN, and they've asked to continue that dialogue. So there is contact, and it's continuing, which is a good thing. Secondly, as I made the point earlier, I don't think the North Koreans don't believe that a piece of paper signed by a US president is good enough. They saw that from their perspective with the agreed framework. One president signed a deal, another president, if you want, abrogated that deal. So they're looking for something that's wider. And the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action with Iran actually had the UN Security Council Plus as guarantors in some way. And so I think North Koreans, if we're ever going to get very far on that, are going to look for that. In terms of the question about how do you build trust, I mean, I think you build trust by commitment. I mean, certainly over the political dialogue I've been engaged in over the last decade and more, I mean, on many occasions we've been pressed by, not by the North Koreans, but by the Europeans in the broadest sense of the term, to actually cancel, because the North Koreans had done something in terms of testing and the rest. And we've never done that. We have a commitment to engagement. Doesn't necessarily mean we actually welcome what they're doing, but they welcome the fact that because we're not government, we don't have to cancel everything every 6 months and then restart it again. So it's commitment, its duration, and the same will be true in terms of any settlement. Any moves in the direction of any serious downscaling in the nuclear threat from North Korea is going to take many years, and it's going to be a punctuated process as it moves step by step in exchange for real engagement and some real action. Words are not enough. I mean, the agreed framework was going to build 2 light water reactors in North Korea. The light water reactors never arrived, but the Americans and the rest of us got the benefit from effectively a short decade of freezing of North Korea's nuclear potential. They will not want to have that recreated again in the future without some real hard benefits on the ground.
So, Glenn, how do we get around the reality? How do we deal with the reality that North Korea, that government on one hand, stays the same, shall we say, the Kim family. On the other hand, in the United States, in the EU, there are elections, administrations change, policies change, back and forth, back and forth. How do we ultimately get to a situation that realistically is serious and enduring? Personal opinion, the North Koreans do not believe that the United States will, in fact, over the long term, carry out any agreement at least between the U.S. and the DPRK. So on one hand, we talk about the need for peace, we talk about the need for a peaceful resolution of issues, but as Americans, policies change, administrations change. So how do we get to, what's the end game here?
Well, as I'm repeating myself, but yes, you need a series of guarantors and not one guarantor. They do not trust they recognize that with different administrations in the United States, there's not necessarily a carry through on any commitments. But when you've got multiple guarantors, then it puts you in a better position. Also, they want something to happen on the ground that's real, as opposed to, well, I mean, as I said, one of their issues is energy. They certainly would welcome some serious assistance, but they're not going to move on to stage 2 of any deal until they've got some real deliverables on stage 1. But I mean, we're a long way from even that discussion. At the moment, the biggest problem is going to be to get the United States and the North Koreans in the same room together in any meaningful way, unless President Trump is prepared to kind of offer himself for yet another summit. Because I don't see the North Koreans being terribly interested in lower level discussions building up to some event when they got so close, from their perspective, they got so close to Hanoi. We're so far away from that, from their perspective at the moment, that there needs to be some shortcuts. And I think it's President Trump that can do those shortcuts.
Thank you. I should also add that in addition to the North Koreans not trusting the United States, there is a lack of trust by the United States government.
I perfectly understand that. I mean, they're both entirely right. Neither of them should trust the other, at least on the basis of their track records.
Well, now let's talk a little more before I go back to Allison with some questions. Multilateral approach. All right. Multilateral approach traditionally is considered to include China, Japan, South Korea, United States, etc. As you are aware, again, Japan, South Korea, democracies. One administration in each country might support a certain goal, a certain agreement. But then as politics change within those countries, it can go the other way. My question then becomes, is it necessary that a multilateral agreement include Northeast Asia countries outside of North Korea? Or should a multilateral agreement, for the purpose of assuring the North Koreans, should a multilateral agreement include countries from other parts of the world that are not vested locally? I'm not proposing that. I'm simply asking the question.
What I'm saying is that I'm using the model which attracts the North Koreans, the one that they're most interested in terms of something that actually exists, which was the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action with Iran. And that was guaranteed by the UN Security Council members plus Germany. I can see a similar model. I don't think if there was a real deal, and it would have to be signed, it'd have to be agreed at least by the current administrations, whatever the current administration will be in 60 days' time in South Korea and Japan. But I think if you had that kind of deal, it would not be possible for either South Korea or for Japan to break that deal on their own. So even if the administration changed, they can grumble about it, but it's tough. Nobody else is joining you, and you're not going to do it first.
All right, Allison, James Hammond, who has direct experience in North Korea, the Mount Paek-2 project, James asks or comments, he says, there are many opportunities for engagement on areas of mutual interest, far from the areas heavily sanctioned. For example, global challenges such as responding to climate change, environmental hazards, and health. How can we best take advantage of these areas to build relationships and trust? Does CPCS engage much in these areas?
Yeah, this is a very good question. Thank you, James. So I think the important thing here is not about how much we can do. I believe that in this community, whether you're a peace advocate or whether you're humanitarian aid workers, we have all been doing a lot. And the thing is that how can we communicate with each other more effectively and also to acknowledge each other's work. I think in the current very much polarized political environment, having direct conversation sometimes can be hard. Even though we're working on similar issues for example, on North Korean issues, having direct conversation can be hard, and we sometimes will fall back on talking to just only the like-minded people. So that's why the focus of CPCS has really been creating conducive alternative spaces for different stakeholders, individuals or organizations alike, to have this platform to really to understand each other's approach, perspectives, and also to build this acknowledgement for each other so that we can collectively find a way to address those issues. So this is also, I'm also trying to answer Mariano's question about how we prepare to facilitate the dialogues. So yeah, going along this line, I would also say, so because the environment is so politicized and also very divided, so that it takes a lot of back and forth conversation. As a facilitator like CPCS, there's a lot of bilateral conversation before we are finally able to convene these people in a more structured setting. Yeah, so just to make use of these questions raised by our participants to express my view on dialogue.
Thanks, Allison. Also, Ambassador Joseph Detrani asks, what other peace organizations are you working with? Are there any U.S. organizations? Also, is your organization trying to get the UN more active? I think that question's already been answered. And regarding the other questions posed by Ambassador Detrani, I'm sure he understands, as do I, that you can't necessarily share in this fora everything that's going on privately with other organizations, but please feel free to share what you can in response to his question.
Yeah, so we've been in good connection with the AFSC, who has been doing remarkable agricultural program in the DPRK, and their approach, their value-driven approach is also something that inspires CPCS approach in facilitating dialogue with North Koreans as well. And we are also we're also in very close connection with a few other civil society advocacy groups like the Women Cross DMZ and their very remarkable Korea Peace Now campaign. So yeah, these are some of the very great connection that we have in the United States.
So, Allison, I know that Christine Ahn is a contributor to the book. Can you elaborate some, please, on the work of Women Cross DMZ?
Wow, this is I'm not sure if I'm really in a good position to introduce this great organization. So they emerged in, I think, 10 years ago as a feminist movement. So they initiated the crossing of the DMZ. So, and then since that movement more than 10 years ago, they continue to roll on their advocacy campaign in the United States with an aim to shift the narrative about the Korean conflict. And yeah, so that is a very remarkable movement that I have heard. I have listened to Christine, and also one thing that I wanted to highlight is that from what Christine has shared, which is also documented in the book, what I've learned is that the journey toward peace is really not a linear process. It takes a lot of twists and turns, and we really need a community. Whenever we hit a wall, we need to go back to we need to have a space to have some deeper reflection and to regroup, to recalibrate, and to adjust our approach so that we can come back even more strongly. And so now we see how Women Cross DMZ, as well as the Korea Peace Now campaign, has evolved to become a even more stronger national, international campaign in shaping, reframing narrative about the conflict. So sometimes I would wonder, yeah, there are a lot of people doing a lot of great things. And then when we hit a wall, do we have that space to really look back on the past journey, to look at what we have learned, whether it's success or failures in the past, and how can we cultivate our reflections and learning and our connection and our resources, and to prepare for the opportunities ahead of us. So when we see the shift, the recent shift in Seoul, and also the upcoming shift in the US, we believe that because as a organization focusing on facilitation, we believe that we need this kind of dialogue space, like the one that NCNK and Keith is hosting right now, to really revisit our lessons so that we can, make the most of our opportunities ahead.
Thank you. Glenn, a country that is quietly involved in dialogue with North Korea is Mongolia. And as you know, Mongolia has a high level of trust on the part of South Korea, on the part of North Korea. There are dialogues which occur, various peace meetings that occur in Mongolia or facilitated by the Mongolians. But it seems to me that China, Russia, South Korea, the United States, do the other players in this process adequately recognize the role that Mongolia is playing or could play?
Well, I mean, the answer is no, in my opinion. Mongolia has this special relationship, though one shouldn't exaggerate it. I was at the Ulaanbaatar Dialogues last year. And I think the North Koreans did not attend that in any form, but certainly in terms of opening up, I mean, the two countries that may well be involved in that process are Mongolia, which has this good relationship with North Korea, and the other would be Sweden. I mean, the Swedes also have a reputation, and the Swedes are one of the few European embassies that have been allowed back in. It's the Swedes and the Poles that are back in from the Europeans. I mean, the Germans have burnt their boats by recently joining UN command. It must be the only country that's joined a war 70 years after you had an armistice, but fine. So I don't see the Germans playing much of a role. But yes, I mean, these are countries. I mean, it's a bit like ourselves, I think, CPCS and Track to Asia. I mean, at the moment, there's nothing very serious happening. The North Koreans have not really opened up to these kind of groups again. They're moving in the right direction. And you've seen some expert groups go into Pyongyang. You're now seeing North Korea beginning to open up to tourism with what we talked about earlier. People are being allowed in Rasong. I anticipate that probably by April, May next year, some of these what I call Track 2 groups will be invited back into Pyongyang to have their Track 1.5 meetings. So, and that may well be facilitated by Ulaanbaatar or by Stockholm. So yes, they need to play a role. There is no settlement on the peninsula without the United States, but the road to get there, the road to peace, as Allison made the point, has got many twists and turns, and it's helped if you've got some people who've got some experience to guide you on your way a little. Particularly those who've got experience from dialogue rather than negotiation, because negotiation tends to be, in a sense, fairly hostile, where dialogue is more amenable to trust building than negotiation.
Well, thank you, Glyn. Before I turn to Allison and Glyn for final remarks as we close out, I would like to mention Glyn's book, Picturing the DPRK. Glyn, tell us about the book.
Well, yes, I mean, it's done with a particular political purpose. I mean, like the comment Allison made earlier, we need to show the North Koreans are ordinary people like ourselves. And having been traveling to North Korea over a quarter of a century and more, I discovered I had 7,000 or 8,000 pictures, and I thought it might be useful. They're not necessarily very good pictures, but they are pictures of North Koreans at work, rest, and play, which gives a very different image from the one that we see of marching North Korean troops in Kim Il-sung Square with quasi-nuclear warheads sort of on transporters alongside them. So yes, it's to show North Koreans, which is why I've got pictures of North Korean elections. There are apparently that you can now have 2 candidates on occasions. Pictures of people at work and pictures of people in the water parks, on the beaches, and elsewhere. So yes, this is the North Koreans are normal.
All right. I'd also like to briefly reference a book by Michael Schluter, No Other Way to Peace in Korea, A Practical Path to Reunification. And so this is certainly an out-of-the-box approach. Michael gets into the possibility of trade, step-by-step processes, and so on. So I wanted to take this moment just to reference those 2 pieces, those 2 books, since they do refer to somehow ending the war, peaceful resolution, etc. Allison, final remarks.
Actually, nothing much to add, but just want to say again, having direct conversation at this time right now is very hard because of the many levels of polarization that we have seen in different countries or political landscapes. So, I mean, I still think that after listening to many contributors, I still think that there's still a lot of untapped lessons that we can really dig into. And again, in the facing the upcoming changes in both Seoul and also DC, one of the ways that we can better prepare ourselves is really to having the space to revisit those past lessons by having some constructive dialogue with some less like-minded people. So we have to go beyond our bubbles and also and to listen to more different perspectives. And yeah, I believe that every obstacle can generate strength for future opportunities ahead of us if we have the space to really reflect on what's our purpose and what's our intention and what does peace look like to us. So I'm hopeful that like what NCNK has been doing and also CPCS and Track to Asia, I'm hopeful that many people are now trying to talk more to each other, to understand each other, and more bridges are building right now.
Allison, thank you. And I'd also like to extend thanks to CPCS Executive Director Nikki Singer and also to Dr. Emma Leslie in her role as Senior Advisor. Emma first reached out to NCNK years ago, and I'm very grateful for the introduction that she made to NCNK about CPCS. So thank you and your colleagues. Glyn, final comments.
Yes, I mean, the world has changed rather dramatically. I think we need to look at new ways to engage with the North Koreans that don't follow the old pathways that, for the moment at least, maybe temporarily are blocked off. So in a sense, rather than going through Seoul, I think we're more likely to be going through Ulaanbaatar or Stockholm. And so that's one of the things we need to explore, how people engaged in dialogue and people engaged in track to relations with North Korea can find new entry points now that some of the old ones are closed.
Agreed. And Glyn, referencing your comments about Sweden, as you're aware, Sweden is the protector of U.S. interests in the DPRK, as long as representing, I think, a few other countries. Ambassador Semneby, the Swedish special envoy for the DPRK, has been traveling the region, traveling to the U.S., reaching out to the North Koreans. And as you noted, North Korea did welcome Swedish representatives back into Pyongyang. And Glyn, thank you as well for your collaboration with NCNK. We appreciate it very much. We look forward to remaining in contact. Finally, I would like to once again thank my colleagues, Seth Joyner and Marissa McPherson, for their important assistance in setting this up. And I wish all of you who are watching, wherever you may be, a good day, evening, or otherwise. So thank you for joining.